Welcome to American Immigrant. My name is Mike Kim, and this is my family story. This podcast series dives into the concept of immigration and the American dream. Our story focuses on my family's journey from war-torn Korea to the United States. It is a story of immigration, of poverty and sacrifice, and of service and patriotism. Through my family story, we will explore commonalities in the American immigrant experience. Our hope is that our story will highlight the struggle for opportunity and equality, and convey the sacrifices and dedication it takes to fulfill the American dream. And what we hope to realize is that the American experience is not based on race, gender, religion, or orientation, but of the human spirit. And perhaps we will realize that we are not that different, and the same hopes and dreams and desire to protect and provide for our families ultimately should unite us as Americans. Webster defines an immigrant as a person who comes to a country to take up permanent residence. The definition does not delineate whether it's voluntary or forced. The connotation of the word, especially given the current political landscape, is heavy. The idea of immigration is closely linked with the American dream. For many, immigrants sacrifice familiarity of a known environment, leaving family and loved ones, and even endangering their own lives to come to America. Whether it was the first set of immigrants from Europe hundreds of years ago or my parents in the 1970s, the motives, perhaps, were not that different. The term American Dream was first coined by James Truslow Adams in his 1931 bestseller, The Epic of America. In the book, he defines it as the following: a dream of a social order in which each man and each woman shall be able to attain to the fullest stature of which they are innately capable and be recognized by others for what they are, regardless of the fortuitous circumstances of birth or position. Later in the book, he writes that America allows its people to dream of a better, richer, and happier life for all our citizens of every rank, and that this is our greatest contribution to the thought of the world. The American dream is a beautiful yet increasingly complex notion. Even in 1931, James Adams acknowledged that the American dream, and I quote, has been realized more fully in actual life here than anywhere else, though very imperfectly, even among ourselves. In the midst of emotionally charged debates and divide in our society that has been exacerbated by the advent of social media, it is important to take a step back and provide a common understanding, a foundation from which discussion should take place, a space and a forum where emotionally charged topics are analyzed from every facet with objectivity, rational thought, compassion, and empathy, with a unified goal for progress. It can be both. An understanding of history and context can garner nothing but gratitude and appreciation for the political system that we are living in here in the United States of America. We can truly appreciate the freedoms and equality this country provides, while fiercely fighting for progress and acknowledging that our system is not perfect and needs significant healing, growth, and change. In a time where extreme headlines grab the nation's attention, this podcast series, with humility and candor, closely examines what it means to be an American. This is my family's American immigrant story. Prologue. Our family story is not unusual. It's a story of immigration and the struggles that come with pursuing a better life for your loved ones. It is a journey that realized into the American dream, though with struggle and sacrifice. My family story has some unique aspects that provide a beautiful narrative from war-torn Korea in the 1960s to present-day Los Angeles. From it, we will get a glimpse into the Asian American psyche and perhaps the origins of biases and stereotypes. This podcast series is a love letter to my family. It is written with a sense of desperation, from a fear that the stories which shape my view of the world and have been the underlying strength of my development will be unavailable to future generations. Our family's history provides a glimpse into the devastation of Korea after the war. It is a story of struggle and survival, and of poverty and perseverance. It is a story of life choices that seem to make sense in hindsight but are daunting and questionable at the time. It is an acknowledgement that seemingly insignificant choices and outcomes have substantial importance and ramifications in the life we now live. Most importantly, it is a reminder that the American dream is a beautiful reality, a confirmation that the sacrifices made by a generation can significantly alter the course for future generations. It is also an Asian American and Korean American journey, one that shares similarities but has distinct differences with other minority experiences in this country. It is an examination of how we are perceived by American society, and also a study in personal identity, as we are fully American and yet don't feel fully accepted. Central to our story are several key characters: an orphanage named Boundless Love in war torn Korea, an army officer named Bob Christensen from Ithaca, New York, Koreatown, Los Angeles in the 1970s, and the United States Military Academy at West Point. The story begins with a college entrance exam that provides a perspective on my father's developing years in Korea and sets the narrative for his journey to America. Through his story, we catch a glimpse into the poverty that many Koreans experienced after the war and helps explain the significant role education played in the miracle of South Korea's economy and the consequential value placed on it as a result. This series examines our family's history and the role of service and entrepreneurship in its narrative. It covers a history of my grandparents, my father's life in an orphanage, and the life-changing influence of an American Army officer. We examine my dad's journey and his love story with my mom, which significantly alters the trajectory of his life. Their story continues in Los Angeles, a story of the American dream that created a better life for our family. The series then shifts to the fulfillment of this dream and my generation's attempt to understand our identity. The series captures my experience attending the United States Military Academy at West Point, serving in the United States Army, and pursuing my dreams as an entrepreneur. Ultimately, even if very few listen to this, our hope is that this story cultivates appreciation among future generations, to acknowledge what our family went through, to love each other more fiercely, and to understand that we are free to dream. Chapter 1: The College Entrance Exam. It was impossible for my dad to understand how this one test would eventually shape our family's future. The significance was not lost on him, however, as all students understood the near-term impact for them and their families. This was Korea in the 1960s, devastated by war and poverty rampant. One of the only avenues for a family who escaped from the North and lived in abject poverty was to enter a prestigious South Korean university. The Korean system is different than the United States. Each college has a unique entrance exam that ultimately decides acceptance. Top among these schools, in a category by itself, is Seoul National University, SNU. The aura of SNU is a combination of Harvard, Stanford, Yale, and Princeton. It is solely on a level by itself and the ambition of every top high school student. Here is my appa, which means father in Korean, explain the significance of SNU, the importance of the entrance exam for his family, and his preparation for the test.
In 1970, I was 16 years old and a freshman at Daegwang High School. The school was located in eastern part of Seoul. At that time, and even in present time, there are 3 top colleges in Korea. They are all located in Seoul. Seoul National University, Korea University, and Yonsei University. These days they call them Sky School, SKY. And SNU was considered the best out of the 3. And the value or ranking of high school is pretty much determined based on how many students they send to the top 3 colleges. I don't know how many high schools were there at that time, but for sure, over 90% of them were not able to send even one student to SNU. So the value of a school could be elevated to the next level even one student going to SNU. My high school was not in the top tier high schools because they didn't produce many SNUs. But since they were sending at least a couple of hundred students to Yonsei and Koryo universities, it is still considered a good school. I remember in my class of 1973, over 200 students went to Yonsei and Koryo, but less than 10 to SNU. Without a doubt, SNU was a dream school for every senior high student. At that time, and also even in present time, the Korean society is pretty much, most importantly, connected by the alumni. You're favored by your superior just because you graduated from the same school as them. SNU graduates are well placed in every key positions of government and commercial sectors, and they willingly give a chance to their fellow younger SNUs. And usually no one challenges that decision because SNUs are considered in an elite class. They were viewed as geniuses by the society in general, the cream of the crops. They are accepted, welcomed, and even honored to have in every company or government institution, pretty much everywhere. When I was growing up, I'm sure I didn't know much, but even from when I was a junior high student, my goal was to go to SNU. I was not mature enough to understand all aspects of it, but I fully knew that I must get into SNU at all cost, especially under my circumstance where you can't rely on any family or outside support. I knew if I get into that school, the dream of living an upper class life in Korea was pretty much guaranteed. At that time, my family and relatives, they all migrated from North Korea, some before and some after Korean War. Not that many, but as was the trend at that time, every family has at least 3, 4 children. And among them, there was none who went to SNU. So everyone was hoping that someday one of their children to go to SNU. And it could be such a wonderful thing for the family. I was academically strong, stayed at the top 1% throughout high school years. Yet, I knew I had to do more for the SNU entrance exam. So, come a year before the exam, I decided to allocate very small number of hours to sleep and devote all my waking hours to studying the subject. Whenever I had a moment, I didn't play. I either memorized English words or tried to solve math problems. No TV, no entertainment, no nothing, but just studying. My day usually began at 4 a.m. and was filled with the preparation for the entrance exam until midnight, other than doing the daily necessary chores, but all else was spent for studying. It's crazy, but it was relatively a norm to most of the students who were preparing for the exam, especially for those who are wanting to go to SNU. Sometimes I remember I overslept an hour or so, then I felt so guilty and rebuked my body, say, because it was lagging behind my will. At my school, and also probably same in other school, during the senior year, every month there was a mock test for entrance exam and the rank chart with the student name showing the test results was posted on the wall with every student name from the top to the bottom. So it was definitely a glory to the top student, but a painful agony and humiliation for the bottom one. It was a popular way to motivate the students to study more, but very brutal one. I'm sure it cannot be done in this day and age. But at that time, nobody was challenging it. And such was considered a norm because going to a top college was just too important. My study plan and strategy seemed to be working because my name was one of the top 3 throughout the year.
My Appa spent a year preparing for the exam with minimal sleep, clearly understanding what being an SNU graduate would mean for the rest of his life. It wasn't just him. All Korean students understood the significance of SNU. Most students paid for either group lessons or private tutors, but my dad could not afford these and had no choice but to prepare the best way he knew how. His strategy was to memorize whole textbooks by repeatedly reading them from cover to cover. Perhaps not the most efficient strategy, but one he decided upon. In order to appreciate the significance of this exam, it is important to understand his background. My dad was born on December 1st, 1954. The Korean War ended in 1953, in a war-torn country to parents that had escaped North Korea in the 1940s, which was under Japanese occupation. My grandparents could not afford to take care of my appa and his brothers, and they eventually entered an orphanage. This orphanage was founded by my maternal grandfather, a visionary and entrepreneur at the age of 21. Unable to fund the orphanage but desperate to care for hundreds of children devastated by the war, he reached out to the United States Army for sponsorship and sustenance. Aptly named Boundless Love, the orphanage is a central narrative to our family's history and my personal life. My dad was not born into privilege and experienced poverty, as did many families in Korea at that time. Here are some of his recollections of childhood.
I remember being hungry a lot of time. Right, it's not just my family. There are many families that don't have enough resources to sustain their life. Food was very scarce, and the living condition was very poor. No running water for sure. Not much of a heating resource. No clean bathroom. Still, there were good days. One of those days was my first day of elementary school. I was wearing a backpack, and remember I was very happy and very proud of the fact that I'm going to school. Another happy memory is a birthday party, my birthday party. This is first time and last time. So this is both a happy and sad memory. My father arranged a small birthday party for me with my neighborhood kids. That was something that I cherish all my life. Every now and then we had no food for dinner. Those were not happy days. I remember that I just wanted to sleep to forget the hunger. Sometimes I ate 2 pieces of bread for a whole day. During the elementary school days, the school gave corn bread to the students from a poor family. Actually, there were many students who were eligible to receive that cornbread. I was always very happy and grateful to get them. I was hoping to get more than one, but usually just one per student. So hungry and food, those are the keywords that I remember the most. During school recess, not all the time, but I sold popsicles on the streets. I probably didn't make much money. And with that money, I was able to buy a small amount of flour. And that rice was more expensive than flour. So we're not able to buy the rice, but flour was affordable. I bring the flour home, and my sisters made a flour dough, cut them in pieces with their hands, made them into a flour cake soup called sujebi. Koreans still eat that. That's every time I eat that sujebi, reminds me of those difficult time. That sujebi was and is also always so delicious. Before the grocery stores become popular in Korea, there were stores selling just rice and flour. Most people bought them by the bag. The small bag, medium bag, and large bag. And small bag of rice or flour was the smallest amount you can buy. And many times I remember we bought the smallest bag of flour. The stores also sell rice or flour by the bale, which only rich people could afford to buy. Many times I dreamed of buying a bale of rice, and that thought made me always so happy. Actually, the entire nation was so poor. It was nothing but a miracle how Korea went from ash to prosperity.
My dad has clear memories of hunger and pain, with no clear idea of how he was going to eat the next day. He remembers longing to fall asleep to subside the hunger pains he experienced on a daily basis. Although it was through these experiences that his work ethic was forged, it was all he knew at that time. It was life. It was through this hunger that he excelled at school and worked towards the SNU exam. It was extremely rare. One of my uncles told me it was close to impossible that a student would do well on the SNU exam without the proper support system. Appa had no choice. It was up to him and his drive to prepare for this important exam. SNU was all or nothing for him. If he failed, he planned to study for another year and retake the exam. The significance of the results were understood, as newspapers and radio stations published and broadcasted the names of accepted students every year. So with this heavy burden, he took the exam.
Actually, I had to take two tests. One is a nationwide prep test called Preliminary College Entrance Examination. The prep test was a pass or fail test. Passing was easy, probably less than 10% of applicants fail. So I didn't particularly study for the test because I was so confident that I would pass. But what's important about that test is you must take it and pass it to be eligible for the real college entrance exam. And it so happened that I was very sick with the flu on that day, but I had to take the test because I can't wait another year. I remember I was half asleep during the test hours. Even so, I was still able to pass. Many years later, the prep test eventually took over the college entrance exam in its entirety, so that students just take one test. To take the SNU exam, I went to a school, not my own, but a nearby one, which was designated by SNU as an exam site. The exam consists of a written test and an interview, face-to-face. The written test was broken down by each subject, taken in several periods. We took one subject per period, and there were 3 mandatory subjects for all colleges: Korean language, literature, English language, and math. And SNU was unique in requiring more subjects on the exam, such as history, social science, chemistry, physics, and the second language, either French or German or Japanese language. My choice was German. I don't know why SNU was unique in doing so, but that was the case. So usually the high schools organize a special class for those students who are studying for SNU. The face-to-face interview was conducted by a professor from the department that you apply to. It happened on the same day or next day. I don't remember for sure. I was so nervous. I fully understood the significance of the exam and interview and realized fully that I had to do well. I don't remember much what I said during the interview. I think it went okay, pretty much. But by the time I had an interview, I messed up my math exam very badly. So the first period was Korean language and literature. Even though I was a Korean language test was always a challenge. It required the knowledge about not only the modern, but also the old Korean language and much of Chinese characters. But I was able to do the test not too bad, to my surprise. Even a little bit better than average. I was happy. But second period was math. Math, M-A-T-H, was a mess, M-E-S-S. It was a disaster. There were 10 questions, no multiple choices. I normally go over all the questions first and attack the ones that I have confidence first. From the first pass, I thought I only knew the answer for just one question. Oh no, 1 out of 10, that's a crisis. I went over them again, and another one, I saw some clue, but I definitely have to solve more, at least 4 or 5. Usually if you get 70% on the math test of SNU exam, you are a genius of the geniuses. And my strength is in memorization, so I excelled in languages, history, and social science. So I never really expected to do well in math, but I knew I must get the average score in math to pass the entrance exam. Most people get 40 to 50%. In my situation, it was merely 15%. I was dying. So I was desperate in finding the answers. Time was ticking, my heart was pounding, and I was sweating. Even some 50 years later, when I think about that test hour, I'm still sweating. All those hours I spent studying math was going down the drain. I read the questions again and again, but it was just not clicking. I was so miserable. After the math period, I knew there was no way I could make up for the loss. I was a little bit happier after I did well with my German language exam, but the failure in the math portion was just too big. On the next day or so, the newspaper published the answers to the exam questions, so I was able to check mine and ended up calculating around plus minus 320 points for the whole exam, giving some credit to have correct math answers. Not sure exactly when, but the newspaper soon announced a cut-line score for each department. I checked English language literature department and it was 330. So I knew I did not make it. I didn't even think about checking linguistics department because it was just put down as a placeholder on the application, not another option in my mind. Their cut-line score was 320.
Let's pause for a second. Here's our first glimpse into Korean American culture. My parents' generation projects the importance of the Korean college entrance exam, their experience, to the SATs and other entrance exams. You have a whole cottage industry of SAT prep schools throughout the US. You even have Asian prep schools for entrance into private high schools in major cities. In summary, if you're Korean American and want to prep for any kind of entrance exam, there's a prep school available to you. For SAT prep school, it is just about mandatory for all of us to attend. I remember my appa sending me to a summer crash session. I refused to attend SAT prep, thinking I was going to play soccer, but he forced me to anyway, and being in vocab class with junior high students. At the time, I did not appreciate why my appa pushed me so hard. He drove me to school all of junior year in high school with a shoebox full of vocab cards. But understanding his history, it's now perfectly clear. The SAT was the most stressful test taking experience of my life, and that includes everything I experienced at the United States Military Academy at West Point. With the recent debates regarding Asian minorities and the application process to Harvard and other Ivy League schools, it is important to understand the context behind it. In the minds of our parents' generation, their realization of the American dream and the sacrifices they went through and the experiences that shaped their worldview, education was the key to success. Korea was war torn in the 1960s, devastated. A third world country with no economy. What has happened in South Korea is an economic miracle. To rise from a third world country to one of the top 10 GDP nations in the world in this relatively short span of time is nothing short of amazing. Companies like Hyundai, Kia, Samsung, and LG are known in every American household. My parents' generation attributes this success to education. It was the emphasis on education that laid the foundation for this incredible growth and is a common link for all Korean Americans. Working hard in school was not an option, but a requirement. Secondly, education is our barrier against racism here in the US. Follow me in this exercise. Picture the typical Korean or Chinese kid in your high school. What are the terms associated with him? Nerd? Introvert? Overachiever? Definitely not the team captain or popular kid. Now take that same picture and put Harvard Med School or Harvard Law School under his name. Educational accomplishment immediately changes the perception and stereotypes someone has on an Asian individual. It is our NBA and NFL. It is our armor against judgment and people automatically being dismissive. So why are Asian Americans' parents so up in arms? You're diminishing their sacrifice, removing the barrier against racism for their children, and undermining the path to pride and prosperity. Hopefully, this makes a little more sense now. And while we're at it, let's dismiss a common stereotype. Asians are not naturally just good at math. Our parents just work us 10 times harder than your parents. Back to the story of my appa's quest to enter SNU. My appa was devastated. He came under the realization that he was going to fail the exam during the math portion. Out of 10 questions, he was able to get one right, and if lucky, receive half credit on a couple others. He was clueless on how to approach the other math questions. While trying to come up with some kind of answer, he realized that the countless hours of studying was all for naught as he failed this section miserably. My appa summoned the strength to power through the other subjects but lost any hope of getting in. SNU, as well as other universities, require students to choose their top two desired majors. My appa chose English as his first because, according to him, you're pretty much guaranteed a good job after you graduate, and linguistics as his second. Every major had a cut-line score that was published by Korean newspapers 1 week after the exam. Here are my appa's recollections of the exam.
When the newspapers published the names of those who passed the SNU exam, I was looking for my name under the English department, even though I knew I didn't make it. Yes, no, my name was not there as expected. I didn't bother to go to the SNU campus to confirm. I thought that was a waste of time. So even if it was expected that I didn't make it, I was still extremely disappointed. All the faces of the family and friends, teachers, with a disappointed look, were passing by in front of my eyes. I was especially sad because I was not able to meet the high expectation from my family. How can I face my mom and sisters and brothers and tell them that I failed? But I was not giving up to go to SNU. at all. At that time, it was not a disgrace to study another year or even another 2 or 3 years of some die-hard people and take the SNU exam again. There were some who were studying for Yonsei or Korea universities, but not that many. Most of them were studying to go to SNU. I was ready to apply for an entrance to a well-known private prep school called Daesung Hagwon, through which quite a few students passed the exam at their second time or third time try. Naturally, my family could not believe it when I told them I didn't make it. Because even though SNU was a difficult school to go into, they thought, who can make it if I cannot make it? That's what they were thinking about. I was always good academically, from my elementary to all the way to senior high schools. At one time, I transferred from one school to another school, which was 5th grade. Then I became a top scorer at a test in 6th grade. So within a year, I caught up and be able to pass everybody else. So my families had confidence in me. And interestingly, my future father-in-law, Mr. Chang, was asking my elementary school to recommend a student for a need-basis scholarship. He was at the time in his early 30s and already running an orphanage, serving some 100 children. And as far as school is concerned, I was a perfect candidate, not only in need basis, but also merit basis. It was one example of many fortunes I received thanks to my strong academic achievements. But all those meant nothing because I didn't pass the SNU exam. I felt so miserable. My eldest sister and mother were living at Busan at that time, and my sister came all the way to Seoul to visit me and make sure that she heard me correctly, that I failed. Once again, since I was a top graduate student from Daegwang High School and with a proven academic track record, it was just not possible for me to fail in their eyes. The future of my family was hinged upon me passing the exam, and I had disappointed them. This was devastating.
My appa was considered a genius by his family members, and a lot of them had hope for his success. It wasn't undue pressure. For a family that had come from North Korea and lived in poverty, having a family member accepted into SNU significantly shifted the reputation and prospects of the family. My appa did not go to SNU to check the main wall for his name, because he knew he was not accepted. Having heard that he failed, his friend came to visit with the intent of taking him to a ping pong parlor to cheer him up. Obviously heartbroken, my appa did his best to ignore the disappointment and the daunting task of sacrificing another whole year preparing for the exam. Little did he know, however, that this little trip to the ping pong parlor would change the outlook of his life forever. On the next episode of American Immigrant, we dive deeper into my family's history and the impact of the Korean War on the peninsula. Given what Seoul looks like today, it's hard to fathom the devastation experienced over 70 years ago.